A man dies, but nobody seems to care. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about a short story of interest, one that is about baseball. I am referring to Death of the Right Fielder by Stuart Dybek, which was published in 1981 in the short story collection The Coast of Chicago. For those who don't know, Stuart Dybek is an American writer who has gotten their work published for the past 30, 40 or so years. They mostly have written short story collections as well as some poetry, and they've won a number of awards for their work. And they also teach at a university in Michigan. That's pretty much all I know about them, but I can say that I really enjoyed the short story collection. A lot of bizarre short stories here. And so, yeah, I think I'll end up recommending this. If you're out there in search of short story collections, you might be able to find it at your local library like I've done. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have intriguing short story collections. But without further ado, let's talk about Death of the Right Fielder. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So, Death of the Right Fielder focuses on an unnamed squad of baseball teammates, not playing in any official league, but playing in a sandlot. At the start of the story, they discover that a right fielder has died on the field. Nobody really noticed until a short while later, when the right fielder did not return the ball. There's a sense of indifference as well. Like, nobody is really emotional about it. They just sort of accept that it happened, and they develop a bunch of weird theories. Some say it was disease, others say it was a sniper or a gang member who just didn't seem to like the right fielder and shot them from afar, although there was no sound of a bullet, so that couldn't have been the thing. And I think what everyone eventually decides on is that the right fielder tripped when they were diving for the ball, and they landed on their head or something like that, and that seemed to have killed them. And they ultimately just decide to bury the right fielder, I think, on the field, which is pretty strange. I'm not sure if anyone is notified about it. They just sort of bury the right fielder, and then that right fielder is replaced, although there is a sort of notice or awareness of that the right fielder was a past person, because the burial or the mound is kind of obvious. Although it could also, because it kind of sticks out, it could also lead to more deaths, and then the feeling that the right field position might be cursed in this particular sandlot. And then as the story comes to a close, the narrator notes that some people never really get started, and they're washed up by the time that they're 17, but for others, it could be more embarrassing, like famous baseball players who've screwed up, especially as they've gone past their prime, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with Death of the Right Fielder. One of the main things that Dybek is touching upon here is the feeling of indifference. A player has died on the field, but no one seems to have noticed until, the ball was hit towards his area, and no one seems to specifically care. I don't think anyone was really close to this person, and it's not producing any emotions within these people, which is kind of a strange thing to happen, because usually if you're playing in a sandlot as these people are, that usually means there's some sort of connection. They could just be neighbor boys who gathered together, but surely you know each other, and there's bound to be emotions that develop, but that's not really happening. And I think there's just some sort of assumption that this particular person was not good enough, that they weren't that great of a baseball player. They weren't an infield player, which demanded some attention, as they note. There's a kind of hilarity there. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Nor could it have been leukemia. He wasn't a talented enough athlete to die of that. He'd been playing center, not right, if leukemia was going to get him. Which is a very interesting way to kind of think about it. Like, oh, he wasn't a talented enough player. It couldn't have been like leukemia or anything like that. Kind of referencing other players in history who've developed diseases like that or cancers. There's a sort of dark humor to this story that's paired with that indifference, which makes you feel like these people are cruel or something like that. That these people don't really care if one another dies. But if that were the case, they wouldn't have buried this person to begin with. Sure, there's no like grave marker or anything like that, and there were no parents notified either, which is strange. I think that's adding to the dark humor of the story. But you don't bury people, like you don't give a grave to somebody you don't care about. So like they decided to bury this person and memorialize them in some capacity, even if it is in a small way. So I think, ultimately what Dybek might be trying to say there is that we do try to distance ourselves from death. It's a kind of a heavy thing, and nobody really wants to think about it, especially young people. So even though, they did try to memorialize that person, that person might be forgotten years down the road, especially because they're so easily replaced. Which I think Dybek is just trying to say, nobody wants to think about death, so they try to move on from it as soon as possible, even if that they're always going to play on that sandlot, at least until they go off to college or something. So it's going to be there, even if they try not to remember it or anything like that. There's also an element of existentialist absurdity to this story, and I think what Dybek might be trying to say is eventually, even the best and the most talented people are brought down. Like this person could have had an entire future in baseball. They probably wouldn't have, because some people are washed up by the time that they're 17, as the narrator says in this story. But even if they had gone on to have a Mickey Mantle moment, or a career like Mickey Mantle, as they specifically say, they could have been brought down like Mickey Mantle, when in a moment where they were past their prime, they dropped a ball in the World Series and really hurt their team there. So maybe this right fielder's death was good for them, is ultimately, which is what the narrator is tries to believe, like, because they didn't realize they were washed up. They didn't realize that maybe they had no career, or if they did have a career, then down the road, they would embarrass themselves and ruin things for their team. It's sort of an absurdity. You're kind of showing how weird life is, and how ultimately it has no meaning. And the right fielder's death captures this sort of bizarre fact about life, according to like Albert Camus and other writers. Life is inherently meaningless. So to ascribe meaning to like baseball flies in the face of everything that could really happen to you in baseball, including just dying on the field. So you just kind of have to accept that and move on and hope for the best, even though the best might not come your way. The last thing I want to note is talking about genre of the story. The big question that I have that I think I can pose to you all out there is does this count as horror? I know we're in the spooky season at the time that I'm talking about this. Is this technically a horror story where somebody dies and people don't notice, but when they do, they don't really care? That's certainly an awful thing, especially for someone to be buried before you even have a funeral, or like parents are even notified. Presumably, the child, or the young man in this story, the 17-year-old kid, like, surely, like, somebody would have to notify, he'd have parents or something like that. So does this count as a type of horror story, or is it something else entirely? Like, is it more of an absurdist kind of sports drama, a brief absurdist kind of sports drama? Because it's only like 5 pages. I think you could make that argument too, but I'd really like to hear what you all think out there, because, again, genres are kind of weird to really affix to mini stories, because mini stories could have multiple sort of genres. But it is something worth discussing and talking about here, because this is so nebulous and kind of hard to really define. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Death of the Right Fielder by Stuart Dybek. A pretty solid short story, one that I really enjoyed reading for however brief it was. It was certainly a bizarre one, and definitely one that I love cataloging on this channel because I have never heard of this book before. I've never heard of this author, but I love the short story. I love that it exists. I love how strange and utterly like sort of absurd but also surreal it kind of feels in the telling of it. So highly recommend that you go seek this out. Maybe check it out from your local library like I've done here. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story or this collection or even this author. Also join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about books, movies, TV, various media, that sort of thing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and baseball playing travels. Farewell.